The persistence of the self is often sought through achievement. This conviction rests upon the premise that demonstrable accomplishment generates a corresponding stability within the individual. The desire for such stability is understandable. Experience inherently presents as a sequence of impermanent states, and a perceived anchor appears necessary for orientation. The accumulation of possessions, the attainment of recognition, and positive evaluations all reinforce the sense of a self, grounded by its achievements. The feeling is intuitive, almost self-evident. The pursuit intensifies as external validation becomes intertwined with self-perception. Performance metrics, social status, and financial security are then considered markers of a secure self. These markers are taken as evidence of an enduring foundation. The feeling of being successful becomes synonymous with the feeling of being secure. This establishes a feedback loop where achievement is required to maintain perceived stability, and stability is required to motivate further achievement. However, examination of any individual accomplishment reveals a complex web of dependencies. No achievement arises in isolation. It is the result of innumerable preceding conditions, many of which are beyond the direct control of the individual. These conditions shift constantly. The availability of resources, the actions of others, even minor fluctuations in environmental factors contribute to the outcome. Each element in this causal chain is contingent, fragile, and subject to unexpected alteration. Consider the variables involved in a professional advancement. Skill acquisition relies on prior education, mentorship, and access to training. Opportunity depends on the decisions of employers and the prevailing economic climate. Success is judged according to constantly evolving criteria established by external authorities. These are not static elements. They represent a continuous flow of influence, impacting the individual's trajectory in unpredictable ways. The very notion of a stable foundation built upon such contingent factors becomes unsustainable. The perceived solidity of the self, derived from achievement, is an illusion. It is an artifact of the observer's limited perspective, unable to account for the intricate, dynamic interplay of causes. The framework itself is unsound. It conflates correlation with causation, mistaking the appearance of order for actual permanence. The continued effort to solidify this illusory stability creates a cycle of anxiety. The self, defined by achievement, is perpetually vulnerable to the inevitable shifts in circumstance. What was once perceived as a source of security now becomes a source of apprehension, as the conditions upon which it rests remain precarious and outside of complete control. The self remains exposed. It exists as a fabrication. The feeling arises, frequently, that success is something possessed. It is an object of attainment, a state of being, and its absence registers as a deficit. This presumption governs many actions, directs many ambitions, and shapes numerous evaluations. It is a conviction held without question, yet its foundation is precarious. The expectation of success functions as a standard. Individuals measure themselves against it. The degree of perceived fulfillment correlates directly with the perceived distance from that standard. This correlation produces a predictable pattern of dissatisfaction. If the standard is met, a temporary reprieve from the dissatisfaction occurs. This is mistaken for contentment, but the reprieve is fleeting. The standard remains, and the judgment begins anew. The presumption defines success as intrinsic, implying it holds inherent value, independent of observation. It appears to be something that simply occurs, a quality that belongs to the individual. However, this apparent permanence dissolves under closer examination. What constitutes success shifts. It is not an invariant property existing in the world. It is a designation assigned. Consider the criteria employed for evaluating achievement. These criteria are culturally specific. They vary widely across societies and fluctuate within those societies across time. What is celebrated in one era is disregarded in another. What is lauded in one community is dismissed in another. The designations change, and the values attached to them are contingent. Success is not discovered, it is constructed. The evaluation of success involves comparison. A person is deemed successful in relation to others. Their achievements are weighed against those of peers, competitors, and historical figures. This comparison is entirely external. It does not draw from an internal reservoir of inherent worth. The judgment depends entirely upon the perspectives of others. Without those perspectives, the designation of success is meaningless. The assessment of an individual's merit relies on the existence of a framework for evaluation. This framework requires a reference point, an external standard. Without it, there is no basis for differentiation, no possibility of ranking. The perceived presence of success, therefore, is reliant on the continued existence of the framework used to assess it. The framework itself is a product of convention, a shared agreement. The insistence on permanence is misplaced. The perceived solidity of success diminishes as its conditional nature is recognized. It does not possess an inherent quality that sustains its designation. It is a label applied, a judgment rendered, and these are subject to change. The feeling of lacking is directly linked to the belief that it should be otherwise. The feeling dissolves as the belief itself disappears. The presumption that success is something to be possessed unravels into the recognition that it is merely a description. The assignment of value diminishes with scrutiny. The sense of security derived from past accomplishment is a misapprehension. Individuals often believe that demonstrable achievement provides insulation against future setbacks. This conviction suggests that prior successes diminish the likelihood of subsequent failure. The reasoning seems straightforward. A record of attainment establishes a foundation of competence, a buffer against unfavorable outcomes. Yet the feeling of control such achievement offers is itself a source of dissatisfaction. The discomfort associated with the prospect of failure is undeniable. It is an inherent condition of existence. Individuals seek to counteract this discomfort by amassing evidence of their capabilities. They accumulate accomplishments as a means of projecting an image of stability and mastery. The impulse stems from a desire to exert influence over an uncertain future. This desire is amplified by societal expectations. External pressures encourage demonstrable performance, discouraging perceived inadequacies. The drive to preserve past accomplishments is fueled by the fear of negative judgment. The individual anticipates the discomfort of public disappointment and actively seeks to avoid it. Accumulating accolades, recognition, and possessions becomes a strategy for preempting unfavorable evaluations. The effort requires ongoing validation, reinforcing the initial belief that achievement equates to security. This belief, however, obscures a critical dynamic. Consider the nature of causality. Every accomplishment, every instance of apparent mastery generates a constellation of dependent conditions. These conditions are themselves impermanent and subject to change. The very factors that contributed to the initial success become potential vectors for loss. The skills honed, the connections forged, the circumstances aligned, all are transient. Clinging to the accomplishment, identifying oneself with it, intensifies the anxiety surrounding its potential dissolution. It is the very act of grasping that creates the vulnerability. The individual assumes that past success establishes a predictable trajectory. They believe the future will mirror the past, confirming their sense of control. This is an inaccurate assessment. The relationship between past achievement and future outcomes does not proceed linearly. It is not a fixed equation. Each moment arises anew, influenced by factors beyond the scope of prior experience. The attempt to extrapolate from the past is an exercise in futility. The desire to secure the accomplishment serves only to amplify the apprehension of its inevitable alteration. The structure of causality dictates that what has arisen will eventually cease to be. It is impossible to perpetuate what is intrinsically impermanent. The pursuit of continued success seems readily justifiable. It is presented as a natural inclination, a forward momentum toward betterment. The reasoning appears straightforward. Striving for positive outcomes is an understandable aspect of navigating existence. Individuals seek conditions conducive to well-being, and recognition often serves as a measure of that well-being. To desire continued success, then, appears akin to desiring continued well-being. This alignment, however, masks a subtle distortion. The desire for continued success operates as a craving. It is not simply a wish for a favorable circumstance, but a yearning to maintain a particular state. The initial impulse, the seed of the desire, might originate from a place of genuine aspiration. Yet the sustaining of that desire, its persistent activation, transforms it. It moves beyond aspiration and takes root as a demand. The assumption that continued success is desirable rests on the implicit understanding that the successes achieved are inherently stable. This stability is, by its nature, absent. Success, as it is conventionally defined, is contingent. It depends on factors outside the scope of individual control. External conditions fluctuate. The judgment of others shifts. The internal landscape of the individual changes. What constitutes success today may not constitute success tomorrow. The craving for continued success creates a feedback loop. The desire generates action. Action yields a temporary result, and that result reinforces the desire. This cycle perpetuates a sense of lack. The individual, preoccupied with maintaining a state already defined by impermanence, experiences a persistent deficiency. The feeling arises not from the absence of success, but from the impossibility of its indefinite continuation. The very act of pursuing continued success confirms the precariousness of the position. Consider the implications of this dynamic. The individual is compelled to continually seek reassurance, to gather evidence of ongoing success. The feeling of adequacy is never fully realized because it is predicated on a foundation of constant change. The effort to sustain the perceived success becomes a source of anxiety. A constant monitoring takes place. A relentless evaluation occurs. This pursuit necessitates a narrowing of focus. Other potential avenues of experience are bypassed. Alternatives are dismissed as secondary to the maintenance of the established trajectory. The individual sacrifices broader engagement for the illusion of permanence. The desire for continued success, once presented as a source of well-being, becomes a source of constraint. The observation is not an indictment. It is a simple recognition of a pattern. The craving for continued success is not inherently problematic until it obscures the fundamental truth of impermanence. This persistent attachment to a fleeting condition generates an underlying dissatisfaction. The expectation of indefinite stability is itself the source of the disquiet. It is this expectation, this unacknowledged assumption, that produces the sense of lack. The desire dissolves when the dependence on permanence is released. The expectation persists. Identifying the causal conditions of achievement guarantees a continued level of accomplishment. This operates as a foundational premise. It is the immediate response when observing a demonstrable success. One catalogues the elements, the effort, the resources, the timing, the relationships, and establishes a framework for future endeavors. This framework feels solid, a scaffold built upon observable facts. The dissatisfaction arises not from a failure to replicate the achievement directly, it is a subtle corrosion. The initial attempts conform to the established conditions, yet the result is diminished, altered, insufficient. A sense of unease then takes root. A question mark hovers over the original analysis. It suggests an oversight, an incomplete understanding. Further investigation becomes necessary. This investigation reinforces the structure. Each condition is scrutinized, refined, recalculated. More variables are included, more layers are peeled back. Still, the outcome remains short of the initial standard. The frustration grows. The belief in the framework's completeness is challenged. It is now experienced not as a pathway, but as a barrier. A subtle anxiety arises. The desire to control the outcome intensifies. The perceived logic underpinning this process is that causality is a linear progression. A leads to B, B to C, and so forth. By understanding A, one gains influence over C. This simplification is crucial to the function of the expectation. It creates the illusion of predictability. It allows for the construction of the framework in the first place. However, the assumption remains: understanding the causal conditions, continued accomplishment. This is the point of departure. The act of identifying conditions is itself a conditioned phenomenon. It arises from a prior set of conditions. These conditions include a perception of success, a desire for stability, a bias towards order. The act of analysis is not objective. It is colored by the very factors it seeks to explain. Further, the universe does not submit to such a neat ordering. Countless, often imperceptible, conditions interact in ways that defy exhaustive categorization. To believe one has identified relevant conditions is to assume a level of knowledge that is demonstrably impossible. The attempt to control, born from this assumption, becomes another condition. It introduces a new variable, one that interacts with the existing network in unpredictable ways. The desire for continued achievement fuels the attempt to control. The attempt to control then alters the conditions. The result is a feedback loop, obscuring the original causality. It creates a narrative of failure where none existed before the imposition of the framework. The framework itself dissolves. It proves to be a construct, a convenient fiction. It offered the illusion of stability, the promise of repeatability. It held no inherent truth. The elements that initially appeared as causes now appear as transient occurrences. They are simply moments within an ongoing flux. The expectation of guaranteed accomplishment fades. The desire to manage outcomes diminishes. The assumption collapses into the ongoing flow. The investigation ceases. The pursuit of success frequently generates the belief that it anchors identity. A feeling of solidity emerges when achievement is registered. This sensation suggests a foundation upon which a sense of self can be built. The attainment of a goal, the recognition from others. These events seem to confirm a pre-existing, enduring presence. This confirms the idea of a self that is real, and that is good. The consequence of this belief is a dependence. Satisfaction becomes contingent upon external validation. Each success reinforces the narrative of a stable identity. Each setback challenges it. The individual operates under the implicit condition that achievement is necessary for being. Without it, the perceived solidity dissolves. This introduces a persistent undercurrent of anxiety. The potential for failure, the possibility of obsolescence, generates a low-grade unease. The conditions under which this belief arises are simple. Social structures reward demonstrable achievement. Systems of evaluation assess performance against predetermined standards. Language itself encourages the construction of narratives centered on personal accomplishment. This promotes the notion that self-worth is proportional to success. The resulting narrative solidifies the connection between identity and external recognition. The connection proves fragile upon closer examination. Success is fundamentally a relationship. It exists in proportion to the standards imposed by others. It relies on an external framework of judgment. An achievement's value is assigned, it is not inherent. A prize, a title, a reputation. These are all external markers, applied to an action, not evidence of an intrinsic quality. They are transient, subject to change, and ultimately dependent upon perspectives that are not controlled by the individual. Furthermore, the notion of a fixed identity is itself unsustainable. A person is not a static entity. They are a confluence of relationships, experiences, and conditions. Each moment brings alteration. Each interaction shapes perspective. What constitutes the self shifts continuously. To demand stability within this process is to demand an impossibility. To cling to the illusion of a fixed identity, especially one defined by success, amplifies the resulting suffering. The individual is perpetually attempting to capture a moving target. The anxiety inherent in this pursuit arises from a misinterpretation. It is the assumption that success identity. It is not. It is one possible manifestation of a constantly changing process. The mistaken identification obscures other aspects of experience. Attention narrows, focused solely on the external metrics of achievement. The broader spectrum of being, the richness of relationships, the simple beauty of existence. These are disregarded in the relentless pursuit of an external validation. The perceived solidity of the self, derived from the attainment of success, vanishes when considered in this light. It was an artifact of a conditional belief. The structure it provided was dependent upon an external condition. The absence of that condition exposes its lack of substance. The individual exists simply as a process unfolding. The experience is often framed as a trajectory, a line drawn, imagined, representing forward movement. Success in this context is understood as the continued ascent along that line. The feeling of being on a positive trajectory is palpable. It fosters a sense of security, a belief in predictable outcomes. The discomfort arises when the line wavers, when the ascent appears to slow, or when a descent becomes evident. This discomfort is proportional to the degree of investment in the prior assumption of continuous progress. The impetus to maintain this upward direction is easily understood. To acknowledge a reversal, to confront the possibility of decline, presents an internal resistance. This resistance is not inherently negative. It is a consequence of the mental construction that defines success as perpetual advancement. The notion of success is therefore not an intrinsic attribute of any undertaking, but rather a projection imposed upon it. This projection creates a framework within which experience is interpreted. The framework itself is predicated on a linear model. It assumes a relationship between cause and effect that produces consistent results. Effort, therefore, is expected to yield proportional rewards. Difficulty is seen as a temporary impediment, a hurdle to overcome on the path to continued success. A deviation from this expectation generates dissatisfaction. The more rigidly the linear model is applied, the more intense the dissatisfaction becomes. It is not failure itself that is problematic, but the failure to maintain the expected trajectory. This expectation of continuous improvement relies on a foundational, unquestioned premise that the condition sustaining the perceived progress will remain constant. The environment, the resources, the internal factors contributing to the trajectory are all assumed to be stable. This is a faulty assumption. All conditions are subject to change. The factors contributing to perceived success are, by their nature, impermanent. Their continued presence cannot be guaranteed. Any system, no matter how robust, is vulnerable to unforeseen alterations. The investment in a positive trajectory compels a denial of this inherent instability. It demands a focus on the continuation of present conditions, effectively ignoring the relentless flow of change. This denial does not alter the reality of impermanence, it merely obscures it. The line, the imagined trajectory, is a static representation of a dynamic process. It is a map attempting to contain a river. The assumption that it contained the river is the fundamental error. The very act of charting a course implies an attempt to control an uncontrollable variable. The feeling of disappointment, of frustration when the line dips, is the direct consequence of clinging to an untenable projection. It is a predictable response to a predictable fallacy. There is no mechanism to prevent the alteration of conditions. There is no action that can guarantee perpetual ascent. The experience of being on a positive trajectory is a transient perception, contingent on factors that are inherently unstable. The expectation of permanence, therefore, is demonstrably false. The line dissolves, but is arbs. The idea persists that fear of diminished status arising from prior success is a manageable emotion. This belief operates as a premise within a larger framework. The framework dictates that social standing warrants protection. Dissatisfaction emerges when that protection seems threatened. The anxiety is often described as practical, a matter of navigating interpersonal dynamics. However, the core feeling transcends such simple characterizations. It represents a deeper aversion to perceived loss. This aversion manifests as a fear. The fear is not simply about losing something, it is about the judgment attached to that loss. The conditions supporting this fear are readily apparent. Hierarchical social systems amplify the concern. Competitive environments exacerbate the perceived need to maintain a position. When individuals are valued based on external markers, the prospect of losing those markers generates significant unease. The individual's sense of self becomes intertwined with the symbols of achievement. A decline in those symbols signals a decline in self-worth. The supposed manageability of this fear reflects a misunderstanding of its foundation. The fear is not an isolated experience. It stems from a broader attachment to impermanence. The desire to preserve status is simply one instance of the human impulse to hold on to that which inevitably changes. A person values the appearance of stability. That value strengthens the apprehension of instability. The fear itself is born of this valuation. This particular fear is not unique. The anxiety surrounding other forms of loss, the loss of health, relationships, or possessions, shares the same root. Each anxiety reflects attachment. The intensity of the fear fluctuates with the perceived value of what is lost. Yet the underlying mechanism remains constant. Examining one form of loss tends to reveal the patterns present in all loss. The assumption of manageability prevents examination of this wider truth. Efforts toward managing the fear of diminished status often involve strategies for maintaining appearances. The goal becomes preserving the perception of success. This focus reinforces the attachment that fuels the fear. It creates a feedback loop. More effort is expended on protecting status. More anxiety arises from the perceived vulnerability. The fear becomes self-perpetuating. Consider the implications of dismantling the premise of manageability. The fear does not simply disappear. Instead, it is revealed as a consequence of a previous attachment. The attachment to status, to external validation, remains the primary point of inquiry. The fear exists only as a symptom. The notion of managing this feeling assumes a separation between the observer and the observed. It requires an agent to exert control. Yet, the fear is not an external entity to be controlled. It is a felt experience arising within a field of conditions. Those conditions include the individual's attachment to the concept of status. The conditions are intrinsically linked. The anxiety dissipates not through mitigation, but through the lessening of the foundational attachment. That lessening requires recognizing the impermanent nature of all phenomena. Recognition alters the framework that produces the anxiety. It undermines the notion that status is a worthy object of attachment. The expectation of a manageable emotion dissolves. The expectation that success is experienced wholly as an independent internal state is a pervasive error. It assumes a separation between the action itself and its reception. This expectation is often held without examination, leading to predictable consequences. The individual pursues a goal, invests effort, and anticipates a purely self-generated reward. Disappointment frequently arises when the perceived reward fails to materialize in the expected form. The disappointment is not necessarily linked to the achievement itself. The activity may have yielded tangible results, served a purpose, or brought about a desired change. However, the anticipated internal sensation, the imagined core of success, is absent or diminished. This suggests the expectation was not about the accomplishment, but about an accompanying felt state. The felt state is invariably conditional. The condition is external acknowledgement. Public praise, professional recognition, visible progress, or the agreement of peers contribute to the anticipated sensation of success. Without these, the same achievement can feel hollow, incomplete, or even insignificant. This does not imply a devaluation of the accomplishment. The act itself retains its objective qualities, the impact remains. It is the subjective experience, the perceived reward, that is altered. This experience of success, as it is commonly understood, is fundamentally relational. It relies on a network of perspectives beyond the individual's own. The value assigned to the action is not intrinsic to the action itself. It is projected onto it by others. This projection creates a feedback loop, reinforcing the expectation of external validation. The individual strives for achievements that will generate this validation, further solidifying the relational basis of the perceived reward. Consider the impact of social media. The drive to share accomplishments, to solicit affirmation, reinforces the dependence on external acknowledgement. The absence of likes or positive comments can trigger a feeling of failure, even when the underlying achievement is demonstrably valuable. This indicates the feeling is not rooted in the accomplishment, but in the lack of validation. The expectation of an intrinsically rewarding sensation is therefore predicated on the presence of external signals. The persistent desire for external validation reveals a misunderstanding of the nature of experience. It establishes a relationship between self and other that dictates the contours of personal satisfaction. It is not a conscious agreement, but an implicit structure operating below the level of direct awareness. The individual is not actively choosing to rely on external signals. They are simply operating within a framework that prioritizes them. This reliance does not necessarily indicate weakness or a lack of self-esteem. It is a consequence of adopting a relational model of success. The expectation of a wholly independent experience of success, therefore, dissolves when examined in light of its dependence on external validation. It ceases to exist as a viable premise. The premise that success is a discrete entity sustains considerable activity. Individuals invest resources, time, energy, finances, pursuing its attainment. Institutions structure systems around its measurement. The perceived lack of success generates dissatisfaction. This dissatisfaction manifests as frustration, anxiety, and a sense of inadequacy. The belief persists that success is something to be acquired, a state of being that can be attained through specific actions. This framework operates upon a foundational misunderstanding. The concept of success is not self-contained. It does not exist in isolation. Its meaning derives from an interdependent network. Its value is relative to the expectations it fulfills. Without the existence of those expectations, the concept loses definition. Consider the ways in which societal norms shape individual aspirations. What is deemed successful in one culture may be unremarkable in another. Historical periods ascribe different values to particular achievements. Current trends elevate certain professions while diminishing others. These fluctuations demonstrate that the qualities that constitute success are not inherent or universal. They arise from constantly shifting conditions. The very notion of achievement requires a comparative structure. Something is successful because it surpasses a previously established standard. That standard itself is a product of conditions. It is a benchmark created to evaluate progress against a predefined goal. The goal, then, is also contingent. It exists as a conceptual framework, not an absolute truth. The measurement of success invariably involves evaluation. Evaluation demands comparison. Comparison necessitates the existence of alternatives. Without the possibility of failing, the idea of success loses all meaning. The entire structure depends upon the acceptance of contrasting outcomes. It requires a binary opposition, success versus failure. This binary operates as a condition of its very existence. The desire for success often originates from a desire for validation. Validation, in turn, is dependent on the judgments of others. To seek validation is to externalize the source of one's sense of worth. This reliance introduces a variable outside of one's direct control. The very conditions one attempts to influence, the opinions of others, are continually changing. The pursuit of a goal, dependent on an unstable foundation, is inevitably subject to fluctuation. The perceived lack of control over external validation creates a cycle of dissatisfaction. Individuals may modify behaviors, alter appearances, or accumulate possessions in an attempt to secure external approval. Each adjustment becomes a further condition of the original premise. The original desire for success is thus compounded by a complex series of actions, each reliant on an external stimulus. These actions, in turn, become conditions that shape the ongoing experience. The assumption that success is a concrete goal ultimately dissolves under scrutiny. The framework itself proves to be a construction, a relational concept arising from a network of interdependent conditions. It is not a thing to be attained. It is a designation contingent upon ongoing processes. The idea of a discrete success fades as its foundational dependencies are revealed. The impulse to pursue what is designated as success ceases to hold the same relevance. The conviction that ambition should yield predictable results constitutes a pervasive error. It operates largely unnoticed, a foundational premise for many actions. This expectation generates considerable frustration when outcomes deviate from anticipated trajectories. The frustration itself is rarely investigated. It is dismissed as a temporary setback or a personal failing. The underlying assumption, however, remains unexamined. Ambition, in its essential form, is a striving toward a specific outcome. This outcome is invariably conceived as desirable. The desire for the outcome fuels the ambition. The ambition then directs effort towards its realization. The inherent vulnerability lies within the linking of these elements. Desire creates a dependence. Effort is predicated on the possibility of achieving the desired outcome. When the outcome fails to materialize, the sequence breaks. The expectation of success arises from a belief in control. It is the assumption that directed action will reliably produce the desired result. This assumption is not inherent to action. It is a learned pattern. It is reinforced by past experiences where effort did, in fact, correlate with achievement. However, past correlations do not guarantee future equivalence. The relationship between action and result is not a fixed law. It is a contingent phenomenon. The belief in control is further supported by the feeling of agency. The sensation of initiating action reinforces the sense that action dictates consequence. This sensation, too, is a conditioned response. It is a product of neurological processes, not a reflection of absolute power. The feeling of agency is not a guarantee of consequence. It does not nullify the role of other factors. The elements contributing to any given outcome are numerous and often imperceptible. Circumstances shift. Unforeseen events occur. The interplay of these factors renders precise prediction impossible. The ambition, however, persists in its expectation of a predictable relationship with consequence. This expectation is fundamentally at odds with the nature of reality. The frustration experienced when ambition is thwarted stems from this mismatch. It is the tension between the anticipated outcome and the actual result. It is the dissonance between the presumed control and the observed lack of it. The frustration is not inherently negative. It is an indication of an inaccurate premise. It is a signal pointing toward a misapprehension. The insistence on control perpetuates the cycle of frustration. The more tightly the ambition is held, the more acute the disappointment becomes. The attachment to the desired outcome intensifies the sense of loss when the outcome is unattainable. The attachment obscures the impermanent nature of the phenomena involved. Everything shifts, everything changes. The very ground of expectation is fluid. The entire structure built upon this expectation of predictable outcomes is therefore unstable. It is a complex arrangement of desire, effort, and anticipated result. The arrangement is inherently vulnerable to disruption. Disruption is the norm, not the exception. The frustration is not a deviation from a proper course. It is an inevitable consequence of the initial premise. The understanding that ambition's yield is not guaranteed diminishes the impulse to pursue it. The prevalent assumption exists that achieving success will diminish suffering. It is a deeply ingrained expectation, often functioning as a primary motivator for action. Success, in common understanding, is positioned as a resolution to existing difficulties, a guarantor of future contentment, and a pathway to an otherwise unattainable fulfillment. This framing creates an implicit equation. Success equals a lessened or even absent experience of suffering. The desire for external validation frequently reinforces this belief. The prospect of recognition, improved standing within social structures, and perceived improvements to material well-being are consistently presented as rewards derived from success. These anticipated rewards function as powerful incentives, compelling individuals to pursue objectives defined as successful. The exertion of effort, the acceptance of sacrifice, and the navigation of challenges are all justified by the promise of a subsequent state of reduced suffering. However, this structure produces an effect that contradicts its initial premise. The very act of pursuing success hinges on a denial of inherent unsatisfactoriness. Acknowledging the pervasive nature of suffering, of impermanence, and of the fundamental lack of inherent satisfaction in any condition is bypassed in favor of the projected relief offered by success. This avoidance is not a passive omission. It is an active construction of a future state presumed to be inherently superior to the present. The consequences of this avoidance are significant. The focus on acquiring external validation inevitably generates further craving. The desire for success is itself a craving, a yearning for a state that will, by definition, be absent until it is attained. Once attained, the state proves temporary, and the craving reasserts itself, now directed towards maintaining the achieved position or securing an even greater one. The cycle perpetuates, driven by the initial assumption that success holds the key to alleviating suffering. Consider the individual who attains a position of considerable influence. The anticipated relief from anxiety, the hope of enhanced peace, often fail to materialize. The position itself generates new anxieties, new pressures, new demands. The individual finds themselves engaged in a constant struggle to maintain their perceived level of success, the very thing they initially believed would liberate them. This struggle constitutes a form of suffering, and it arises directly from the original assumption. The system perpetuates because individuals rarely examine the validity of the initial premise. The focus remains entirely on the external objective, the tangible sign of success, and the internal experience of dissatisfaction is routinely attributed to a deficiency in achieving that objective. The possibility that suffering is inherent, independent of external circumstance, remains unexplored. The conditional nature of the assumption that success provides a reliable antidote to suffering is never truly tested. The expectation of a lasting reduction in suffering through the attainment of success therefore dissolves. When the assumption itself is placed under scrutiny, it disappears. The pursuit of a favorable reputation operates as a common endeavor. It appears to be a desirable condition, promising ease in interactions and an opening to influence. Individuals invest effort in shaping perceptions, carefully managing actions and communications to cultivate a recognized standing within their social spheres. This effort is rarely perceived as problematic. It is often presented as a necessary component of social cohesion, a demonstration of responsibility, or simply a byproduct of competence. However, the assumption that attachment to reputation is benign warrants closer scrutiny. The inherent dissatisfaction arises not from a lack of positive regard, but from the very act of seeking it. The need to maintain a particular image demands constant vigilance. Behavior is filtered through the lens of potential judgment. Actions are calculated for their impact on perception, and spontaneity is often suppressed. This creates a separation between one's actions and their inherent nature, introducing a subtle discord. The individual does not simply act, they act reputation. This reliance on external validation generates insecurity. A reputation, however positive, is contingent. It depends upon the perspectives of others, perspectives that are inherently variable. Social norms shift. Expectations evolve. What is considered admirable in one context may be deemed unacceptable in another. Even consistent adherence to perceived standards provides no guarantee of sustained approval. The individual becomes vulnerable to fluctuations in opinion, subject to the whims of those whose assessment they prioritize. The attachment to reputation also obscures the impermanent nature of all phenomena. A reputation is constructed from a series of moments, each dependent on a complex web of factors. These factors change, the moments pass. The reputation, as a fixed entity, is therefore an illusion. It is a composite built upon shifting sands. To cling to this illusion is to invite disappointment. A positive reputation will inevitably erode, a negative reputation will emerge. These are not failures of character, but demonstrations of the inherent flux of existence. Consider the conditions that enable a reputation to flourish. It requires a social structure capable of evaluation. It necessitates the presence of observers. It relies on the ongoing agreement about what constitutes value. Without these conditions, the concept of reputation itself dissolves. A solitary individual removed from social interaction possesses no reputation. Their actions have no external assessment. Therefore, the very existence of reputation is dependent upon a framework which it cannot control. The pursuit of a favorable reputation, predicated on external validation, becomes a chain reaction of dependence. It is a structure built upon the assumption of a self that can be defined and preserved through the approval of others. Yet this self, defined by reputation, is itself a construct, a projection onto the surface of experience. The foundation crumbles, and the illusion of a fixed and desirable reputation vanishes without residue. The structure of the pursuit itself dissolves. The pursuit of success frequently operates under a specific yet unexamined premise that it can be secured. This assumption is not merely a desire for positive outcomes, it is a foundational belief shaping actions and expectations. The impulse to solidify success reflects a fundamental resistance to the natural flow of change. Individuals perceive achievement as a possession, something that can be held, defended, and preserved. This perception is inherently predicated upon the belief that the state of success itself is a durable entity. The discomfort arising from this assumption is evident. Attempts to secure success are invariably accompanied by anxiety. The very effort to protect an achievement implies a fear of its loss. This fear generates a cycle of reinforcement, constant vigilance, defensive strategies, and a preoccupation with external validation. Resources, time, and energy are diverted towards maintaining a perceived status rather than adapting to shifting circumstances. Dissatisfaction grows not from the absence of achievement, but from the unrelenting labor required to sustain it. The joy of accomplishment is eclipsed by the obligation to preserve it. The belief in secured success is not intrinsic. It arises from a particular mode of observation. It is born from the tendency to isolate a moment in time, to treat it as an independent phenomenon, and to ignore the web of conditions that brought it into being. Success, like any experience, is entirely contingent. It is the product of countless factors, skills, opportunities, relationships, timing, all of which are themselves subject to constant flux. The qualities that contributed to a prior achievement may cease to be relevant or may even become liabilities in new contexts. Recognizing this conditionality does not diminish the value of past accomplishment. It simply clarifies the nature of its existence. Consider the structures erected to safeguard success: intellectual property rights, enduring institutions, philanthropic legacies. These represent deliberate attempts to transcend the limitations of time and circumstance. Yet, the very existence of these structures demonstrates their fragility. The need for legal protection indicates a vulnerability. The creation of foundations acknowledges the impermanence of personal influence. Even the most elaborate strategies for preservation are ultimately subject to erosion. Legal frameworks change, institutions evolve, and memories fade. The act of attempting to fix something demonstrates its inherent movement. Focusing on security creates a paradox. The more vehemently one strives to preserve success, the more apparent its transience becomes. The effort itself reveals the underlying impermanence. The act of guarding something highlights the fact that it is not inherently safe. It is a continuous process of observation, repair, and adjustment. The belief that success can be secured is therefore a self-defeating proposition. It is a construction built upon a flawed understanding of reality. The belief dissolves, leaving the experience of accomplishment as it genuinely is,